All right, let's get back to where were we? Benefits of compassion. I think some of these are a bit self-evident, but let me go ahead and put them on the screen. I've got that all set up now. Just have to do a slideshow here. Come on. There we go. Make suffering more bearable. Obviously, when we have a mind of compassion towards others, we actually can find sometimes our own suffering a little less. And this often happens, right? Where if you're all in it together and something is going on, when you take charge of trying to help others and alleviate their suffering and their fears of what's going on, that you actually find your own suffering and kind of disappears to some extent, not completely gone. Maybe I'll show. I do have a few slides for these. It might be easier to use some of their words. Archbishop said, when you say I, you're going to come a cropper. I never heard this phrase. This is a British phrase. Come a cropper. It means like to fail miserably. But when you say, how can I help? Even in the midst of your deep anguish, it's got an alchemy that transforms your pain. It may not take it away, but it becomes in a way bearable. More than it was at the time when you were just saying poor me, thinking only about yourself. I mean, I think of Viktor Frankl, and when he was in Auschwitz, he was, about helping other people. He found that he got great meaning and purpose by doing that, even though he was in the same situation as most of them, in the same concentration camp, dealing with the same uncertainty and all of that. The second one liberates from fear. Once more, it's a similar thing. Thinking me automatically brings fear, a sense of insecurity and distrust. We talked about this on Wednesday night in the class on working with fear. Fear, in its really essence, comes from this sort of looking only at ourselves and not thinking about things beyond ourselves. Um, if you look after others, particularly those who are in need, then when you are passing through some difficulties, there are plenty of people you can ask for help. The idea being here that we have our own fears alleviated to an extent if we've had that pattern of just caring for others and being compassionate towards others. Um, Next one brings joy and satisfaction. Again, I think it's a tricky because sometimes, again, when we're feeling with the suffering of others, most people would say, "Well, what's so joyful about that?" Isn't that the joy that we normally think of, the joy of having a wonderful event with somebody and celebrating their accomplishments or something? It's not the same at all. Once more, we're always driving towards that kind of inner joy, that inner contentment, that shining peace that we can feel inside ourselves because we are being responsive to what's going on. So, Archbishop says our human nature has been distorted. I mean, we are actually quite remarkable creatures. In our religion, I'm created in the image of God. I have to be growing in godlikeness, in caring for the other. I know that each time I have acted compassionately, I've experienced a joy in me that I find in nothing else. And I find this too. I was talking to some of my colleagues in the interfaith group around compassion and joy, and I think we all universally, whatever our spiritual tradition is, you do find some inner joy by being in a place of compassion and working with others. Going back to the HIV epidemic, that was the way I made it through all of that and found some way of something by being of service to others, doing what I could to alleviate pain, doing what I could to serve others. It was the only way to survive in some way. It was essential to my own well-being. It sounds kind of strange in some way, but there's a deeper satisfaction and joy that comes, I think. And the Archbishop goes on to say, we're wired to be other regarding. We shrivel if there is no other. It's really a glorious thing. When you say, I will care for only me in an extraordinary way, that me shrivels and gets smaller and smaller. You find satisfaction and joy increasingly elusive. Again, that narrowness that we were talking about in terms of a perspective, and especially the one where we're only focused on me versus the more universal embracing of the welfare of all. Um, Totally liberating, right? Has physical benefits. I don't need to talk about this as much. The helper's high, you have endorphins being released in the brain when we are a benefit to others. I found this interesting. The same reward centers of the brain seem to light up when we are doing something compassionate as when we think of chocolate. Well, that's giving a lot of credit to chocolate. I'm not that big on chocolate, but anyway, let's just pass on. Go on to the next one. The warm feeling we get from helping others comes from the release of oxytocin, the same hormone that is released by lactating mothers. This hormone seems to have health benefits. Again, don't have to read all of it for you. I think, again, we can see there is a physical side to it, the mind and the body being very much interconnected. I like this benefit as well, that it's contagious. Compassion also seems to be contagious. When we see others being compassionate, we're more likely to be compassionate ourselves. This results in a feeling called moral elevation. Remember Friday night when we looked at all these different ways of describing joy? This is actually one that Paul Ekman had identified, and I put it up there to refresh your memory. Elevation from having witnessed an act of kindness, generosity, or compassion. And that's why they put those little hits at the end of the evening news so that you get this elevated sense after having watched all the depressing things that are happening with hurricanes and wars and everything else. You go, oh, yeah, and people are still doing good stuff, and you feel good yourself and can rejoice in other people doing that. Um, in his memoir, The Sun Does Shine, Anthony Ray Hinton talks about his choice to practice compassion in the midst of his own suffering. I don't need to remind you of who he was. Again, 30 years on death row. Let me share that passage. It's not really too long. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but read enough of it so you get a feeling for it. He says, no one can understand what freedom means until they don't have it. It's like being wrapped in a straitjacket all day, every day. You can't make a choice about how to live. Oh, what I wouldn't give to have a choice to make. Any choice. I think I'll go for a walk rather than go to bed right now. I think I'll have chicken for dinner. I think I'd like to take a drive and just see where I end up. We take for granted all the choice and freedom that we have. But this idea of a choice, he goes on later, he talks about how this one prisoner there on death row with him was crying a lot. He said the man started crying again. And I realized that I was crying too. I sat down on the edge of the bed and I wept silently for a man I didn't even know, who was most likely a killer, but who also wept in the dark, all alone, in a cage in Atmore, Alabama. You didn't have to be on death row to feel all alone, and I knew there were people all over the world at this exact moment, sitting on the edge of their beds and crying. Most days it seemed like there was more sadness than sense in the world. I sat there for a few more minutes, listening to the other man crying. I was on death row not by my own choice, but I had made the choice to spend the last 3 years thinking about killing McGregor and thinking about killing myself. McGregor was the man who prosecuted him. Despair was a choice. Hatred was a choice. Anger was a choice. I still had choices, and that knowledge rocked me. I may not have had as many as Lester had, and this is someone he knew outside, but I still had some choices. I could choose to give up or to hang on. Hope was a choice. Faith was a choice. And more than anything else, love was a choice. Compassion was a choice. So again, I'm this section on benefits of compassion. I mean, this was how he made it through. This is 3 years in, and he had 27 more years of being on death row before he was released. And he found that the only way he could survive is by having compassion for the other men that were on death row with him. He got to know them, he got to understand them, got to be very close to them, and of course saw many of them go to their death. Again, powerful stuff, but that's choice. You can choose to be in prison and find it a miserable experience and just get all caught up in your own suffering, or you can begin to open your eyes to the suffering around you. On the obstacles to compassion, some reasons why compassion gets blocked. These are just a couple that are mentioned in the book. They both have to do with fear. Fear can be a real strong force to block us from a lot of good things in our lives. We fear our experiencing suffering, vulnerability, and helplessness. We've already alluded to that a little bit in talking about how we go about developing compassion and opening to the suffering of others. There can be distress, there can be anxiety, overwhelm. We fear our being taken advantage of, that others will become dependent on us and that we won't be able to handle others' distress. Because being compassionate does mean sometimes putting ourselves out there and we don't know necessarily. Like your situation, Joy, that you have someone then suddenly takes advantage of that compassion and we facilitate their habitual behaviors or whatever is going on for them. Or we might not be able to handle others' distress and be with them. think I told this story to Carol and Marty last night that when I was doing hospice work in the late 80s, early 90s in San Francisco, was at Coming Home Hospice, which was primarily an AIDS hospice, but it also had people who had cancer. And I decided that I could not just go into a setting like that with no agenda. I needed to have something I was doing rather than just sitting at the bedside of somebody and trying to be with them in their pain and anguish. I wanted to do something for them. And so I studied massage therapy. And in California at the time, you only needed like 100 hours of instruction to become a massage therapist. So my thing was I was a massage volunteer and I would go in for a few hours on a Saturday afternoon. And they're usually at least two, three guys or women. There were women that were staying there as well who wanted a massage. And of course, sometimes it's tricky working with bodies that are in the last stages of life, but found a way to be with them in that agenda. And I came in one Saturday and there was nobody who wanted a massage. And I was kind of thinking, oh, well, I guess I can go. And then she said, well, we do have a young man who seems to be very close to death. Would you mind sitting with him? And I'm like going, panic, panic, panic. Like, what am I going to do here? You know? So I went in, I sat by his bedside, and he was pretty much unconscious. And I sat for a while and just was kind of present with him. And then I go, well, I can still do some touch. I can still hold his hand. And so I reached over and held his hand and kind of embraced his hand within mine and just sat with him like that for what it must have been 45, 50 minutes of just sitting with him quietly in that way. And then his mother came in the door and he woke up and he goes, Mom, you have to come over here and do this. And she comes over and I put her hand in his and just kind of leave the two of them. And he died the next day. You know, we have to get past some of that fear that we think that being with others suffering means that we're going to suffer more. That was the most incredible gift he gave me, you know, to be able to be with somebody in those last moments, hours, and to be able to bring the two of them together in that way, because it was obvious that that hadn't been something that they had done. You know, whatever, perhaps she had her fears, or perhaps he wasn't expressing his needs, but to be able to put the two of them together. Of all the years I did massage work, that was the most precious gift I was ever given. So anyway, sorry, I'm getting so teary-eyed again, but that's just done, you know. You're welcome. Okay. Paul Gilbert, who I mentioned earlier, again, he is a clinical psychologist professor at University of Derby in England. He's written a number of books on compassion, especially one called The Compassionate Mind. He's done incredible research. And again, as I said, developed compassion-focused therapy. He says compassion can flow naturally when we understand and work to remove our fears, our blocks, and our resistances to it. Compassion is one of the most difficult and courageous of all our motivations, but it is also the most healing and elevating. I don't need to say anymore. um, on self-compassion, again, a very important thing that we need to practice because I think we don't do a very good job of that in our culture in general, of looking at ourselves through the lens of compassion. We have a lot of self-concern, but we aren't always genuinely in touch with our own suffering. Self-compassion is closely connected to self-acceptance, which we discussed in an earlier chapter, but it is even more than the acceptance of ourselves. It is actually having compassion for our human frailties and recognizing that we are vulnerable and limited, just like all people. And that phrase, just like us, keeps coming back to play. As a result, it is a fundamental basis for developing compassion for others. It's hard to love others as you love yourself, as both men pointed out, if you don't love yourself. Yeah, and we have that fault in Buddhism very often, where when I first entered into Buddhist teachings and practice, of course, I was coming from some of these sorts of experiences, like I related to being of service to others and having my own partner die and having to be with him in his death, and then Buddhism comes into my life, and I go, okay, I'm just going to jump right for all this, being a bodhisattva and compassion and da da da. But how much had I looked at my own suffering? I think They say that in all the teachings in our tradition. You have to start with yourself. Start with looking at what you experience, being compassionate towards yourself, loving and kind towards yourself. Otherwise, what, how can you possibly be doing that for others? Even Master Shantideva says that in that wonderful text, Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. How can we possibly have the thought for others that we've never generated towards ourselves? I want all beings to be happy, all beings to be free from suffering. Well, it starts right here. I'm going to share with you a little practice that I've put out on the drive from Kristen Neff, a wonderful researcher on it. Let me talk about that first and go to that practice. Psychologist Kristen Neff has identified ways to express self-compassion. When we treat ourselves with compassion, we accept that there are parts of our personality that we may not be satisfied with, but we do not berate ourselves as we try to address them. I often hear that this kind of self-language that we use towards ourselves, and pay attention to it for a while, we're like cruel to ourselves sometimes. We would say things to ourselves that we would never say to our best friend, where we beat ourselves up, berate ourselves, how stupid we are, or whatever language we use. We're going to see that coming into play, that we want to choose opposite language. We want to choose the same language we would use to comfort a dear friend. When we go through a difficult time, we are caring and kind to ourselves as we would be to a friend or relative. When we feel inadequate in some way, we remind ourselves that all people have these feelings or limitations. This is how we actually practice self-compassion. No, we're not that different from anyone else. All people have these feelings. We see that kind of shared humanity. Another phrase, again, that we see repeated in the book frequently. When things are hard, we recognize that all people go through similar challenges. And finally, when we are feeling down, we try to understand this feeling with curiosity and acceptance rather than rejection or self-judgment. Okay, let me take it off screen here for a minute and go to that wonderful little practice. Um, Again, it's called a self-compassion break. It can be a full meditation that you can do, but it's like stop, look, go. You can stop at any time and do this. There are three essential components to it. They're not spelled out as numbers on this. This is a handout that came from Kristen Neff's website. I think it's called selfcompassion.org with the hyphen in there, self-compassion. She said, like, choose a situation, or you can be in the midst of that situation and you find a couple minutes to go sit somewhere quietly and do this, you know. And she suggests using something that's maybe a lower scale thing, but that's just advice for kind of getting yourself familiar with the practice. It can be used for a 10, something that's really challenging. But you start thinking about what is going on, bring that to mind. Don't ignore it. Don't repress it, suppress it, whatever you want to do. Bring it up to the surface. As you're thinking about the situation, getting in touch with some of the stress around it, she says she's dropping three phrases into your awareness. So just repeat these phrases to yourself. The first, this is a moment of suffering. What we're doing, bringing mindful awareness to the fact that it's really hard. I mean, we're kind of being that person who's acknowledging our pain. You can't always be with others who are going to do that for you, so we're going to acknowledge it ourselves. It's hard. And we all go through moments like that, right? Where we just go, I'm having a really tough time. It's okay. You're having a tough time. Acknowledge it. Be with that. Validate it as difficult, as hard, as stressful. Again, whatever language works for you, these are just suggestions. And then secondly, remember that suffering is a part of life. This is the common humanity. It's not abnormal to suffer. We aren't failures because we suffer. We are human because we suffer. Don't think that it's indicative of any fault. It's just the fact that this is part of our human experience. No one gets out of here without suffering, as I said. Okay, use words that speak to you. I am not alone in my suffering. This is a part of my shared humanity, the shared humanity that we all have. Whatever gives you an idea of that interconnectedness, we're all in this together at some level. And then the third one is thinking, may I be kind to myself? May I be kind to myself in this moment? They said even like she says, doing a soothing gesture, like putting your hands on your heart, something that kind of makes you feel like you're being embraced. And you just be with yourself with these thoughts of kindness towards yourself. I'm here for you. I care about you. I'm so sorry you're suffering. Whatever it is, that language that feels good to you. And what I pointed out just a short while ago, if it's difficult to find words of kindness, imagine that you have a close friend who's in the exact same situation, what would you say to that person? Use the same tone and language for yourself. Don't use that habitual berating, downgrading kind of language that we tend to use towards ourselves. Be the kind, nurturing person that is, again, at the core of your being, is who you really are. And we would never say some of the things we say to ourselves to other people. We wouldn't have any friends, right? They'd all be like, I'm out of here. You got some problems to work on there, Don. You know, so um, let's go to the question that I put forward. I think we got time to deal with this, work with this. What have you found helpful in your own practice of compassion? Maybe even take a couple minutes to think about that. If there's something you feel that you'd like to share, what has been an aid, a benefit, something helpful in your own practice of compassion? Anyone? Yes, please, Anju.
So I have a topic that's a little bit different. So it's about compassion, but
Okay.
not so much what's been helpful. What I found is that I tend to be extremely generous and really give a lot
Mhm.
to the people around me. You might know where this is going. And I find that it is sometimes taken advantage of. Like
Mhm.
sometimes I meet people who don't have any limits on what they'll take
Mhm.
and who will keep asking.
Mhm.
And but some of this, so I do some volunteer work overseas. So some of this, there are very different, very eh, large disparities between what I have and between what some of these people have. And still I find myself feeling resentful,
Yeah.
like I'm already giving so much. Like, do you
Mhm.
have to keep asking me for more? But it's not just with this overseas work, it's also with friends at times. And so
Yeah.
this is something that I struggle with because I want to continue being
Mhm.
compassionate and generous.
Mhm.
And it's hard to do. And it doesn't feel good. Like it's not bringing
Right.
up positive feelings
I
in me in these
understand.
situations.
Mhm. No, thank you for that, because I think we've all experienced that to some degree in our lives. Maybe again, our shared humanity, that we do have people that might keep wanting more from us, wanting more. I'm going to give two answers to that. The more immediate thing when we are experiencing that is because our acts of compassion, generosity, kindness, and whatever are not feeling good to us. Well, then perhaps it is good to have boundaries, to have limits, to be able to say, I see that you need more from me right now, but I don't feel I'm in a place to give that. I feel that I need to, pull back a bit or whatever. Say it in a kind way. Don't just, push people out of your life. I think that that's a healthy part of moving towards the second answer, which is the way that we want to eventually end up, is where if we look at where these feelings of resentment come from and we look at where the feeling of being taken advantage comes from, that's coming from our side. I'm not, again, I'm not trying to point fingers or anything or, poke too much at the sore places. But if we recognize that we are the one putting that label on it, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, again, an incredible, unbelievably kind and generous being, he would teach sometimes about how in the West we don't like to get used or taken advantage of. And he said the Bodhisattva actually wants to be used, wants to be taken advantage of in a sense. I mean, wants people to be of use to them, to be of benefit to them, to do what we can for them. There's a shift that has to happen at a very deep level for us to get to a place where we're not going to put that label on it. We're not going to see it as somebody taking advantage of us or using us or whatever. We're going to see it as I am simply doing my best to fulfill the needs of that being. Now, again, shouldn't fall into what Joy was mentioning of it, where we become codependent. And somebody's an alcoholic and they just simply want more and more to increase their addiction and feed their addiction. That's not a wise thing to do. Again, we have to add our wisdom component. But if it's simply a matter of, yes, we can afford the resources we're giving to them or the time that we're giving to them or whatever the case might be, well, then why, that's our stuff that we're feeling a little resentful and we're feeling like we're pulling back and not being as generous and kind. But that's way down the road. I don't expect most people to practice that way. In fact, when I go over those teachings as part of, Rinpoche's advice on the bodhisattva, he calls it the bodhisattva attitude. The bodhisattva attitude is you want to be used by others. I mean, when we're going to talk about generosity shortly, they say one of the goals of our practice of generosity is that we could get to a place where we would even happily give our body away. And there's that wonderful story, you may have heard it, of the Buddha when he was a bodhisattva and he was a prince and he was out with his brothers and they came across a tigress that had just given birth to 5 cubs. And it was a drought going on and there was no resources. And he could see that the tigress was dying and the 5 cubs would die. And he had made these prayers through lifetime after lifetime of this bodhisattva ideal of wanting to be a benefit to others. And he goes, this is my perfect opportunity to use my body to help these beings. And so he went to give his body to the tigress, and the tigress couldn't even eat his body because she was so weak. So he even like cut his own body so the blood could begin to flow and the tigress could, eat his body. And he was joyful in doing this. Now, whenever that gets shared, the caveat is that's way, way advanced practice. That's many lifetimes of practicing this kind of attitude. I'm not about to go running up, on one of these hills and find a cougar and say, here I am, lunchtime. You know, that's just not where I'm at yet. And I don't think anyone here is that at that point. If you are, again, I prostrate to you. But um, so what I'm pointing out is that we need to set our limits initially, be kind of pulling back because we have to keep working with strengthening that muscle of compassion, of kindness, of wanting to be a benefit to others. And we keep moving in that direction. And then we keep testing it again to see how am I with being with that person who's very needy and very greedy and wanting more things, and see if I can keep moving it a little further, pushing the envelope a little further. And eventually you can get to a place like that. It's pretty outrageous to think, you could actually give your whole body to beings that are, again, you don't even have any relationship to them. Buddha didn't, they do say, it's kind of interesting. I think the tigress became his father in his life when he was Prince Siddhartha, is what they say. I don't know. And then the 5 cubs became the 5 disciples, his very first disciples when the Buddha began teaching at Deer Park. And they were the 5 mendicants that were there, that he began teaching. So you develop interesting karmic connections with beings that you're that generous to. That's a kind of a side thing, but nonetheless, that's a pretty selfless act. I mean, that takes a lot of, again, deep work. And of course, you have to accompany it with some wisdom too. He had developed a sense of the wisdom of selflessness and the wisdom of not being so preoccupied and holding on to a sense of self that's a bit fabricated. In fact, all fabricated to a large degree. So that's the long answer. That's the big answer. But absolutely, I don't encourage people to continue to do things that seem right, seem good, seem generous, seem compassionate, seem kind, but they feel horrible to do. It's good to do that investigation, to sit on the cushion and say, okay, what's coming up for me? What is my resistance to that? What is happening? What is that about? And again, if we need to approach it from the vantage point of pulling back and telling the other person, I'm sorry, I can't help you anymore at this time, as honestly as we can, there's nothing wrong with that, because I don't think that we should, and we do fake it till you make it. I agree with that. But I also feel like if we're doing it and we're feeling really lousy about it, or where there's something that's not quite right, then that requires us to pull back and do some deeper investigation as to where that's all coming from. You know? So there's no easy answer, but I just do respect that that is perfectly fine to pull back and to say, okay, I need to work on my muscle of compassion and generosity and kindness. And then when I'm a little better at doing that, I can perhaps re-enter into that relationship. I don't know. Does that help a little bit? Give you some context. I think Mary and then Lindsay. Thank you for that question, though. I know, like I said, we all deal with that. And I have people in my life who are asking for more and more and more, and I do recognize my own limits. Yeah, Mary.
So in that regard, I think maybe it's the flip side, but I'm not sure. As a mother, and most of the, if you're a mother in this room, you most probably feel the way I do, and a
Hmm.
father, you would do anything for your child.
Hmm.
There's just no limit.
Hmm.
So in that regard, you have a lot of compassion. But then in Western psychology,
Hmm.
that can be interpreted as um, enabling.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I was wanted to see if you would speak to that issue. When do you know you're enabling or you're being generous and compassionate?
I don't know. That's a tough one because, again, I'm not an expert in Western psychology. Enabling is a pattern somewhat like codependency, too, right? It's got the same flavor of like, I'm going to, I mean, when they're quite young, I think it's really a bit obvious, right? You don't keep tying your children's shoes until they're 25 or something, right? You know that they've got to learn to tie their own shoes. They've got to learn to tidy up their own room. They've got to learn all these things that will make them into healthy adults. So I think that that's maybe some measure that we have to look at is the practicality of it. Is it practical to continue doing this for somebody, or is it wiser and more advantageous for them to do it themselves? And you can maybe aid them in that, mentor them in that, do what you can to help them. But I think it can be really disastrous for people. I mean, unfortunately, I have a cousin. Now her mother is quite ill. This is my mother's sister who is down in Florida, and her health is really failing. And my cousin has never really learned to be on her own and be independent. And she might have some learning disabilities too. I have not spent enough time in this life with her as a cousin because she's always been down in Florida and then I've been, elsewhere in the world and what have you. But it's really kind of sad to see because she's gotten to a place where there's fear that when my aunt dies, which is probably going to happen before my cousin dies, don't know, but that my cousin will lose it and not be able to do anything and not take care of herself. And so my other aunt, my mom's youngest sister, is already thinking of how to manage all this. But I'm just using this as an example of how I think we can see when we maybe go too far, where it actually becomes a danger to the person. So I don't know that I can give more advice beyond that. I'm just really looking at the practicality of it. Are we, through what we're doing, actually stopping that person from taking responsibility and living a life that they should, by all means, adopt in this world, because otherwise they become a drain on others, whether it's us or whether it's the person they marry or choose to live with or the friends that they have. If someone's going through that of always needing someone else to do something for them, that may be a danger. And going back to what you were sharing earlier, I mean, that's another side of it, that if we do see that our doing that is enabling their lack of taking responsibility, well, then that may be another that reemphasizes the choice to pull back and to say, I've helped you a lot, and let's have a talk about what's not in place for you to be able to help yourself right now. Let's really look at that. And I'm happy to help mentor you to get to a place where you can help yourself, but it's not really working for you to continually look to me to help you. I don't know. That's my suggestion. And all the advice I give is just given from that vantage point. I'm not a professional psychologist or what have you. Lindsay, please. Thanks, Mary, for that question.
Yeah, I think I was just thinking once again about zooming out of any one particular dynamic as a way that I have gotten some relief in some of the things that I heard in your question, Anju, or even what you were saying, Mary or Joy. Like one of the things that tweaks my growing wisdom antenna is if I'm like thinking of something, say I'll just, if you don't mind, Donald, just between us, for example, when there's all these other folks here, you all today, or it's just today versus, what the effect is over time, or, and there is a metaphor from a contemporary, relatively evidence-based psychotherapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, which is about trying to get more in touch with an acceptance of sort of the reality of things and finding commitments that are in valued directions that you might take kind of regardless. There's more to it than that. But in it, two of the kind of fundamental ideas are about how we do kind of narrow down into a dynamic, and then it sort of becomes central. It becomes like the frame that we put all the action in. And another way of describing that they talk about it is like if that conflict or that codependence or that imbalance that wouldn't be wise, or that imbalance where I could try to take more than my fair share of the teacher with all the other, if I just am not zooming out. They talk often about like zooming out to see the whole chessboard and realizing you've kind of gotten really zoomed in on that pawn versus bishop action on the board over here, but just maybe there's more going on. And just really trying to find that, either whether it's like a wider view of time or a wider view of what's going on in the situation, or a wider view of things. And I think for helpers, knowing that we have some helpers and doctors and professionals in the room, I think it's really, really easy to give,
Right.
when we know our wisdom would be saying that there has to be enough of us left to give. There has to be enough energy and some source of renewal in there. So I don't know if I'm back on perspective again, our first
Exactly.
pillar.
Yeah.
But I think there are they may seem kind of vivid, and if so, that's great. But like if you've ever had the experience of genuinely zooming out, and it's like you're in there with all the like minute details of they said this and they did this, or I gave this, if you're in there, you're way in the like details of the trees, or to use the chess metaphor. But if you can zoom out, there probably is a better clarity about what those trade-ups add up to, and maybe finding some more freedom to find a different choice in the larger chess
Wonderful.
game, or in the larger scheme of things, the forest more so than just the trees. I don't know if that's helpful, but for me, I find whenever I'm really struggling with something, I'm way zoomed into it.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Lindsay. Yeah. I'll have to look into acceptance and commitment theories or therapy. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Lindsay said it explicitly comes out of Buddhist background. Yes. Isabella wants to share something.
I am aware of time, so I just want to be conscious, but I do want to share this. Would you mind actually repeating the question again, the prompt for compassion, just so I can?
I can put it on the screen. Okay.
Yes, okay, in my own practice of compassion. So, yeah, I wanted to share that when my experience for when the present moment becomes so unbearable, like how to bear witness to the feelings and sensations and emotions that arise when it becomes so unbearable. But also when it's like this ecstatic bliss and you're staring at the sun and it just feels too much, how to remain present within the midst of these sensations of life. And so going back to gratitude, I often ask myself, how do I honor life? Like, how do I honor it truly, properly? And I keep going back to presence, like, because sometimes nothing ever feels good enough to give my gratitude.
Yeah.
So then I go back to presence. Like presence is really the only thing, the only way for me to actually feel like I'm honoring life for the beauty and like the awe-inspiring nature of what it is to be in like the elation and the awe and be totally present with that, even if it feels completely overwhelming. And so then that kind of like moves into compassion. Because when you can do that for yourself in the midst of such strong emotions and sensations and still remain present and loving in the face of that, and then do that for another, it's really difficult at times, like completely unbearable. But when it does happen, it's like, what a gift. That's the gift in itself.
Yeah. Wonderful. Presence. And yeah, that's great. Thank you, Isabella. Appreciate that. I know I'm going to say something corny and you're all going to, you may have heard that phrase. It's called the present because it's a gift. I don't know. It's kind of cute. It's a pun. Sorry, I like pun humor. I told you that before. Era.
Share my haiku.
Oh,
Because
please.
it
Yeah,
kinda
yeah.
goes along with
Wait,
it's about overwhelm and unbearability.
okay.
I thought it's quick and easy and fast. Licking ice cream fast, all thoughts freeze and reminds us, laugh. This too shall pass.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, we can actually do the haikus now before we move on rather than at the end because, pardon? With the ice cream. Yeah. Yeah, where's our ice cream, Aaron? Chris, did you want to share yours? Are you ready to share yours? I've got one I'm going to share. It's on a screen.
Okay, this is fine. Fake it till you make it. And when you make it, fake nor make will be there.
I like that one a lot.
Fake it till you make it. And when you make it, fake nor make will be there.
Any others who did a haiku that want to share? Marty's got one. Great. I like this kind of thing. Just haikus are kind of fun.
The sun rises, you embrace the warmth with joy. Joy warms your new day.
Ah, wonderful. Beautiful. Here's mine. I'll share mine. Oh, Carol. No, please, Carol. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yes.
Just throwing things everywhere. Okay. Scraped, raw, light shining, shedding misinformation, love with communion.
Wonderful. Beautiful. Thank you. These are great. Okay, here's mine. I actually have to admit I cheated because I did a haiku. No, I didn't AI. This is Don's artificial intelligence, DAI. But I did a haiku as part of the 16 guidelines course. It's for children. 16 guidelines is coming from that secular branch of the FPMT. It deals with, it's a whole nother story, but there's a program called Ready, Set, Happy that's gearing it towards children. Unfortunately, I've never been able to get a program going where I've done this work with children, but I did something very similar. So some of it is coming from that. Joy seems out of reach, like apples high in a tree. Wow, 8 new ladders. Get it? Anyway. Joy seems out of reach, like apples high in a tree. Wow, 8 new ladders. Pillars. Pillars would work. But yeah, I kind of like, that's why I used ladders the first time. I didn't think about pillars. But yeah, I can get up there and reach those apples of joy. Anyway. All right. Oh, we've got one on Zoom. Wonderful. Yeah, I didn't have my Zoom screen on. Monica, please.
Through grief's quiet tears, compassion heals broken hearts. Joy whispers again.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. This is great. Anyone else online or here in the Gompa who had a haiku to share? Well, you can have fun with it outside of here if you. I always find it a nice exercise again to just have people think a little more creatively and look at things. So these were all great. Thank you all. Yeah, Joy, you've got one. Joy has a haiku. It goes like this.
I'm gonna do one in French actually.
Oh, wow.
It's and I can translate roughly, but la joie je respire, digère et diffuse pour tous. La joie je partage. So joy I'm breathing in, ingesting and diffusing for all, and joy I'm sharing. Those sound
Wonderful.
better in French, I think, but I am sharing. Yes.
The joy I am sharing. Yeah, that's great.
I do love my native language, so that's why I like to
Beautiful. Beautiful. I'm glad you did that. Yeah, in French. I studied French when I was in high school, but my French is like Zippo. Yeah. Doesn't seem like I carried much of it forward, but thank you. So thank you, everyone. Yeah, these were great. Okay. back to the task at hand. Let's go to our slides here. I don't know if he did. I had the invitation. Don disappeared. Okay. He's going to go work on his. So again, I'll go through these concluding thoughts real quickly so we can go on to generosity. The Archbishop and the Dalai Lama had revealed throughout the week one of the core paradoxes of happiness. We are actually most joyful when we focus on others, not on ourselves. In short, bringing joy to others is the fastest way to experience joy oneself. As the Dalai Lama had said, even 10 minutes of meditation on the well-being of others can help one to feel joyful for the whole day, even before coffee. When we have the courage to live with an open heart, we are able to feel our pain and the pain of others, but we are also able to experience more joy. And this is, again, seems like paradoxical. Being with others' pain being a source of joy. Again, going to the sheet that you have for some practice advice, one of them involves that 10-minute meditation. Try doing 10 minutes of meditation on compassion before your coffee if you wish, or after your coffee if that makes more sense for you, and just see what happens, throughout your day. But the first one, reflect on your own capacity for practicing compassion, whatever level that might be. Again, no judgment, to have self-compassion as well, and rejoice in your ability to open to your own suffering and the suffering of others in the world. Again, bring some joy that you have this, and Chogyam Trungpa called it that soft spot. We have this place that we need to be in touch with and acknowledge. And even the people who have become cruel still have a soft spot. They just have a lot of armor around it. But again, as Leonard Cohen says, there's always a crack where the light gets in. There's some way. Maybe I'll tell this story. I hate to waste more time, in a sense, telling stories, but it's a wonderful story about a Buddhist teacher who I was at a retreat with him of Buddhist teachers that took place on the East Coast back in 2012, 13, something like that. I didn't really get a chance to meet him so much, but when I first saw him, I was a bit taken by him because he had a lot of tattoos and things going on. I mean, didn't look like me, right? So we have the, and so I heard his story. His story is that he grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, which I always think of as like, picket fences and, rose gardens or something, but actually it's got a pretty kind of difficult side to it. And he was dealing drugs on the street. His father was a drug dealer and got him involved at a very young age. And he started going astray and became part of a gang. And the gang would go out with baseball bats and beat people up on the street, at night. He tells the story that he one night went out there with his baseball bat in hand, and they see this homeless man, and he's raising the bat to get ready to hit this man, and the man locks eyes with him and says, "Please don't do this to me." And his name is Vinny Ferraro, this guy. Vinny says, "What makes you think I'm not going to do this to you?" And the man says, "Because you have the most compassionate eyes I've ever seen." And the soft spot was revealed, through the force of this man who, again, maybe that was a Buddha or some divine being appearing there that was a catalyst for that to happen. But he was able to, he dropped the bat. I mean, he couldn't do it. He stopped. He never beat anybody up again. He became a Buddhist teacher, a meditation teacher, and so on. He found his whole spiritual path by his own recognizing, again, there's something else there. There's this spark of compassion that's inside him that he could open to and embrace. And he'd been cruel before that, absolutely cruel. My gosh, things that hopefully none of us in the room have done, beating others with baseball bats. You can find his story online. But anyway, Vinny Ferraro, just like Geraldine Ferraro, same last name. I don't think he's related, could be. Here's my little cartoon for generosity. See how it's a circle? You have that guy in the upper left giving coffee to the guy on his left anyway, to the right of us. Then you have opening the door for the person who comes in with the flowers, and then the flowers are being given to the woman, and then the woman is pouring coffee for the other woman, and then that woman is giving a gift to the man with the tie. So again, it's a circle of generosity. So the Archbishop said with a laugh, "Our book," meaning the Bible, "says that it is in giving that we receive. So I would hope that people would recognize in themselves that it is when we are closed in on ourselves that we tend to be miserable. It is when we grow in a self-forgetfulness, in a remarkable way, I mean, we discover that we are filled with joy. It's when we have that self-forgetfulness, get out of our own stuff and actually open to being generous, kind to others. I've sometimes joked and said, God doesn't know very much because when you give to others, it should be that you are subtracting from yourself. Maybe you subtract from your bank account a little bit, but in this incredible kind of way, I've certainly found that to be the case so many times. You gave, and it then seems that in fact, you are making space to be given to you. Buddhism would call it the karma of generosity. Every time we are generous, giving whatever we have to others, we create the karma of receiving. I mean, and you shouldn't be doing it with that motivation. "Oh, I really want to get a lot of money. I guess I have to give a lot of things away and then I'll win the lottery." You know, don't think selfishly around it. Just think it is natural to want to give again when it's informed by our compassion. And particularly we see that it's important that we address the needs of others because we are connected to them in the interdependence, wisdom, and compassion always together. And he points out that there's a very physical example. You know, I've never been to the Dead Sea, but the Dead Sea apparently receives fresh water, you know, all of it kind of pouring in from various rivers, but there's no outlet. So it doesn't pass the water out. Most, you know, lakes or seas or whatever, there's somewhere that the water goes then from there. It receives beautiful water from the rivers and the water just goes dank. I mean, it just goes bad, he says. And that's why it is the Dead Sea. It receives and does not give, you know. It's a good example of like how we can become kind of a Dead Sea. And we are made much that way too. I mean, we receive and we must give. In the end, generosity is the best way of becoming more, and more joyful. So we're at that 8th pillar. I'll go through these. I think we got a little over half hour. I should be able to get through these. Benefits of generosity. Again, don't need to say too much there. I do want to point out the ways of giving that Buddhism emphasizes, and they are in the book as well. Obstacles we might have, a new mentality, and then this generosity of spirit. Generosity is so important in all of the world's religions, right? When I grew up Christian, it was called charity there, faith, hope, and charity, right? These really ideal virtues that we want to be practicing. And no doubt because it expresses a fundamental aspect of our interdependence and our need for one another. Generosity was so important for our survival that the reward centers of our brain light up as strongly when we give as when we receive, sometimes even more so. You know, if we're given genuinely, again, we can give with ulterior motives. It's not, without a doubt, that happens in our world, right? I'll give to you, but you owe me now. You know, I've got you. You're going to have to repay that in some way. Again, that's a form of attachment. It's a deluded mind. It's only thinking about myself while I am attending to the needs of others. But if we are giving genuinely, we're really being sincere in what we are offering to others because we want them to benefit from it, then that's an amazing source of joy and well-being for ourselves as well. Researcher Elizabeth Dunn and her colleagues found that people experience greater happiness when they spend money on others than when they spend it on themselves. Dunn also found that older adults with hypertension have decreased blood pressure when they are assigned to spending money on others rather than themselves. So again, we can see that this is scientifically showing, I think almost all of these we've had that there's health benefits to practicing these 8 pillars, many of them, and we need to acknowledge that too. Not that that's again why we would do these things, but just say that's a side effect. On the various ways of giving, generosity is not just about the money we give. It's also about how we give our time. In the happiness literature, there's a great deal of research on the importance of having a sense of purpose. They even talk about how, for older adults in particular, as people lose some of the sense of purpose they had in their occupation, what they were doing, that it becomes really important when people move into retirement and what have you, to still have avenues of purpose that we can express through giving our time, volunteering at organizations. There was a wonderful project going on in Santa Fe with the public schools where older folks who were retired were coming in during the recesses and lunch hours to be kind of there with the young kids and keep an eye on things to make sure that, you know, things don't go out of whack, you know, don't put them in danger or anything, but essentially with younger children. What a wonderful way to give one's time to help young people, and to also keep that kind of bond between the old and the young, that people used to all grow up in the same household, and now older folks might end up in a home where they're never seen except, around the holidays or what have you. And again, purpose fundamentally is about how we are able to contribute and be generous to others, how we feel needed by and of value to others. Again, many people find that through occupations. Many people find it through what they do as a parent caring for their children, or they find it as, volunteer activities, or they find it in any number of ways. Being involved in a spiritual community can bring a sense of purpose to people. So there are various ways to give even beyond our time and our money. Thupten Jinpa explained that in Buddhist teachings, there are 3 kinds of generosity: material giving, giving freedom from fear, which can involve protection, counseling, or solace, things that we do to alleviate the fears or anxieties of others. And spiritual giving, which can involve giving your wisdom, moral, and ethical teachings and helping people to be more self-sufficient and happier. And spiritual giving, don't think that, again, it means being in a formal role like I am of teaching a course. It can be just how we teach, through example and through being of support to people in our lives and saying, you're going through something kind of tough here. I was at a weekend course and there was this topic that I think might be of use to you. Would you like to hear that? Would you want to discuss it? Offering what we know, the experience we have, the teachings we've gained to others. And he goes, this spiritual giving is, of course, what the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop were giving all week long. We're going to see a special way that we can frame that spiritual giving. So material giving, I'm just going to go through these really briefly. There's no substitute in some ways to helping to lessen the inequality and injustice that are such enduring features of our world. Whether you tithe or give I think it's the same in Pali and Sanskrit, dana. Dana is the word for something you give that's monetary in nature. This is really the beginning of weekly and even daily practice of thinking about how you can give to others. It does start to some degree with our material giving. Going back to it, there was that wonderful practitioner of the rocks that Lindsay shared that had all the white rocks in one and the black and so on. There's another practice that one Lama said that is how we can start our material giving if we feel we're a bit tight-fisted. And that is that we take something like a rock or like this little wooden dowel and we go, oh, here. Oh, thank you. Oh, here. I mean, it sounds kind of silly, but maybe you could do this initially with kids so they learn just kind of letting go and giving and then, I don't know. Little silly, but we have to find ways to kind of stretch that muscle of generosity as well, exercise that. When certainly living in San Francisco, when I did in the late 70s all the way through almost late 90s, in 98 when I left, beginning of 98, the unhoused population kept increasing. And I hear just keeps doing so, unfortunately. Every time I go there now to visit, it's just really amazing isn't the word. It's really depressing in many ways to see how so many people are unhoused these days. But, it takes a lot to continue to give. And so, how far can we go? We might initially just give some change in our pocket. We might give $1 or $2. We might give $5. What does it look like to give more? Just work with it. Don't go beyond your comfort zone. If you're not comfortable giving more, then you're going to feel lousy about it, right? You're going to say, oh, I gave too much. I feel kind of regret that. It's not good to regret our material generosity. But there's, again, as he said, there's enduring injustices in our world that mean that some people have resources and some don't. From a Buddhist perspective, you can point to it and say, well, it's their karma. They didn't create the karma generosity in their past life, therefore they don't have those resources. But that doesn't change the fact that you still can have compassion for their situation. In fact, you should have even more compassion for their situation. And if you could do something to alleviate the suffering of others materially by sending money to agencies that are benefiting people halfway around the world that are suffering, or whatever it is that you feel you need to do to make that a reality, that's an important expression of our compassion and kindness. Yeah, bless you. Okay, second one, giving freedom from fear. We often just say this, giving protection, counsel, solace. This is how we give our time and attention to others. Who needs your presence today? Do your children, your spouse, your parents, your colleagues, your friends, or even the stranger on the street need your compassion and caring? To whom can you reach out to support? And we often don't have to look very far to find people who need some kind of protection from fear or some danger that they might be in. And this can even be like insects. In the summer in Santa Fe, there's tons and tons of ants and bugs and what have you. And you might have out a bird bath or something, and they get caught in it because they go for the water because they need water. It's a very dry place, and they get floating on the top of it and really struggling. You can just go by it and say, "Oh, poor ant." Or you can take something, a leaf or something, and gently take them out of the water and put them on the side so they can have their little ant life, the rest of it, rather than drowning in it. I mean, that's a form of protection, right? So anything that we can do where people are in, beings are in a situation that is suffering, you know, do your best. The last one, spiritual giving. Once more, they emphasize the same thing I just said. You don't have to be a holy man or a spiritual teacher to give in this way. Spiritual giving can involve giving wisdom and teachings to those who may need them. And as I said when I talked about that a short while ago, I think still it is very important that we always have permission to share these sorts of things with others. Otherwise, Buddhism is not into proselytizing. We don't go door to door and with our little Buddhist books and say, I'd like to talk to you about the Buddha today. Are you have a moment? Can I leave this material with you? We don't do that. It's not that we don't want people to benefit from the Dharma. We do, but we also recognize that you have to be very careful working with others. You have to be very mindful of where others are at. And in our culture in particular, most people don't want advice. Even look at ourselves. How often do we want somebody to come say, what I think you really should do is you immediately like go, we don't necessarily want to hear everybody else's pearls of wisdom, right? So it's best that we work with people who at least give us permission. If we are seeing somebody who's really in a lot of suffering and we know, or at least believe, that the spiritual advice that we've received, that we've implemented will be of use to them, then say that. Again, I've got some things that I learned from going to this course or from reading this book or something that I've used that I think would be really useful for you. Are you interested in talking about it? They say, no, I don't want anything to do with it. And you say, okay, just offering. No problem. Don't get resentful. Just say, understand that that's not where they're at. They're not in a receiving mode when it comes to that. I think that's really important that you have some kind of permission. Otherwise, it looks like I know better and I'm just trying to force this down your throat. And, I don't really care whether you like it or not. On the obstacles to generosity. This is Douglas Abrams. He says, I want to come back to what you were saying, Archbishop, about how you feel like our human nature has been distorted. What is it about our modern life that distorts our innate sense of compassion and generosity? Because I do feel like this is the core of our being, and in really tough times, those will shine through. We will find a way to help others. Like, look at what happens when there's earthquakes out here. I was in San Francisco when the earthquake happened in '89, and people coming out of their homes to help people who were in distress and dealing with things. We people naturally come together, come out of their cars when the freeway collapsed and whatever to see help the people who were trapped in their cars. But there's something about our daily life that does distort some of that innate sense of compassion, generosity. This is the Archbishop's response. He says, we've been brought up to think that we have to obey the laws of the jungle. And these are a bit, again, I don't again like the phrase hardwired, but they are there from our biological roots, the fight or flight and all those sorts of lizard brain kind of stuff that we think we're competing with others. And in the beginning of humanity, those probably, again, had a purpose and served some sort of purpose. Eat or be eaten. We're ruthless in our competitiveness. We work not only to supply our needs and the needs of our families, but we are trying to outdo the other. In a very competitive world, I think this is why it's so hard for young people, particularly coming into the world and seeing, do they really want to get involved in that? Do they really want to participate in that? We've downplayed the fact that actually our created nature is that we are made for complementarity. We have become dehumanized and debased. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, we must learn to live together as sisters and brothers, or we will perish together as fools. wise words from Martin Luther King, because that's what we have to do, absolutely, especially in the days that we're living through now. And there's no way in which one nation is going to be able to prosper on its own, America first. Well, that's neglecting the fact that America depends upon pretty much the rest of the world for everything that it has, or many of the things that it has. It can't. That's not how we're made. We were wired for this complementarity, this togetherness, this being family. And even if you think it is sentimental, it isn't sentimental. It's for real. How can we neglect the needs of those who are contributing to our welfare and benefit from that? Right? Cut off aid here, do this, embargo them, put a tariff on them, and we depend upon them. All of this becomes, again, just such a competition. So a spirit of generosity definitely needs to kind of take place there. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have problems in our world by not having that mindfulness of others, their needs. What do these countries and people who we're in relationships with on a global scale need? So he goes on then, and this is a really interesting topic, and I'm glad that they ended the book this way. I think Douglas Abrams did an amazing job of structuring the book to get to this place on the need for a new mentality. It's very difficult to deal with our current world crises because of our basic mentality. I think this is his whole Archbishop talking, continuing to his thing on this. As you mentioned, no, I'm sorry, this is Douglas Abrams, right? Because he's talking to, I remember now in the book, the Archbishop's father was an alcoholic and he would beat his mother often. And in the forgiveness chapter, they talk a lot about how he had such a hard time forgiving his father for those acts. But anyway, he was also had a strained relationship with his father as it was. So again, as you mentioned, Archbishop, your father was usually a very good man, but when he was drunk, he behaved badly. Today, I think many human beings are drunk. Maybe this is His Holiness talking, actually, it could be. They have too many negative emotions. I'm sorry I didn't put that in there. I'll see if I can find it and insert it in the slides, but they have too many negative emotions like greed, fear, anger dominating their minds. So they act like drunk people, kind of drunk with delusions. I don't want to be all negative on humanity, but there's a certain truth to that. And that's why the Buddha gave the teachings he did to counteract all of these states of mind, greed, fear, anger, and so on. The only way out of this drunken stupor is to educate children about the value of compassion and the need of applying our mind. We need a long-term approach rooted in a vision to address our collective global challenges. And this would require a fundamental shift in human consciousness, something only education is best suited to achieve. It's kind of interesting. Around this time was when His Holiness was also doing a lot of work around what's come to be known as secular education. In our schools, at least in the US, are very much geared at helping people to get a good career and be successful when they grow up. They're not about so much of instilling values and ways of living peacefully and compatibly with people in the world. That is now the domain of whether parents teach that, whether spiritual traditions teach that to them. But His Holiness's thing is we need a secular education. We need to reassure that people are educated in how to be good citizens, how to be good citizens of the world, and to care for our planet and for the people in it, as well as, again, all the other beings. So this is something, again, that he was quite keen on and is definitely part of a new mentality to think that it is our responsibility to make sure that people have this long-term approach rooted in this vision of how we can actually work together. I mentioned that book by Joanna Macy, where she mentioned that that's really the part of this great turning, this third option of how the story that we can live by, that if we think that there's going to be a shift in consciousness and move our own consciousness in that direction and try to put energy into that, things will follow. As beings' consciousnesses changes, so do their actions. Time never waits. So I think it is very important that we start now. Then maybe the new generation will be in a position to solve these global problems in their life. He's not trying to pawn it off on them. He's just saying, guess what? We've failed to some degree to solve a lot of these problems or address these problems early enough so that they didn't become problems. We, the elder generation, have created a lot of problems in the 20th century. The generations of the 21st century will have to find the solutions for them, unfortunately. I think he's really not feeling like he wants to pawn it off on them, but recognizing that that's invariably what we are looking at. We'll take the energy and the foresight and the work of a lot of people who come after us to fix a lot of what we have been a part of. So, I mean, people are fundamentally compassionate, the Archbishop said, coming back to one of his core points, and the Dalai Lama jumped in. Yes, that's the basis of our hope. Yeah. Our hope is that the fundamental nature of people will always keep driving towards the greater good, to see the better angels of our nature and to follow that rather than to continue to have the wars and conflicts and everything else that has been so problematic for humanity from the beginning. It's not that we're going to ever get rid of that, perhaps, but that'll hopefully lessen. In fact, I have never read this because it's such a huge book. I ordered it thinking it was going to be a small book I could get through. I didn't look at the pages, but there's a book by Steven Pinker called The Better Angels of Our Nature. And it's like this, and I go, oh my gosh, very thin pages. And I'm like, can the Cliff Notes? Can you give me the summary? But his premise is that actually, as a culture, we have gotten much more peaceful. And if you look at it again, I mean, we were dealing with certainly in the Dark Ages and Middle Ages and all this stuff, there was a lot of conflict in Europe, even in Asia, quite a bit. Again, maybe not quite as severe, but there's still, yeah, and things are still happening. We're not saying we've reached some level of perfection, but it has lessened. And he says that's because of that better angel of our natures, because that is really at the core of our being. And a very important message for us to remember and for us to live by and to look upon others through that lens. It's again another perspective. Okay, on the generosity of the spirit. This is kind of something they identified separately. Again, in Buddhism, we don't say this is a fourth type of generosity. If anything, it's included within the third one of spiritual giving. But nonetheless, I think it's worth spending a little time talking about it. So here now, Douglas Abrams, he was bringing in, I guess they'd assembled some questions from different people. This is from someone named Micah in South Africa. And she asks, how can you be of service to people, nature, and causes in need without losing yourself completely to a crisis mentality? Talked about this already to some degree in this course, but this really gets to the heart of it. If we're going to keep giving and being involved and a compassionate response to our world, how do we not lose it? How do we not just throw up our hands and just, say we're defeated? How can we help the world heal and still find joy in our own life? Whoops, what did I do there? That doesn't come on here. It's weird. I don't know where that comes from. Okay, it's an AI thing. They've infected my computer. The Archbishop said in response to this, as an old man, I can say, start where you are and realize that you're not meant on your own to resolve all of these massive problems. I think many people who are very dedicated to activism in our world and doing what they can to work on the environment or other issues, that starts to feel like you get so passionate about it that you feel like it's your job to fix it. It's your responsibility to fix it. He says, do what you can. Seems so obvious. And you will be surprised actually at how it can get to be catching. Yeah, but we do have to kind of recognize that none of us can alone solve the problems that we're facing. As a world, as a nation, we go back to the divisiveness we're seeing in this country, but it starts with the actions that each one of us takes and the way that we are in our world. Yeah. I was saying, stop by that guy who's got the political sign that's opposite to the party you're going to vote for and just say hi. Just get to know them. You don't necessarily have to get into a whole conversation about why they're voting, but make people feel welcome. Make people feel that they're being honored as people rather than being looked at as the enemy or whatever. But he says, hey, remember, you are not alone. You do not need to finish the work. It takes time, but we are learning, we are growing, we are becoming the people we want to be. It helps no one if you sacrifice your joy because others are suffering. It's a really important sentence. It helps no one if you sacrifice your joy because others are suffering. How can we help others? This goes back to what Anju said, right? We've got this, if we're negative in mind when we're helping others, well, how does that really help? I mean, yeah, they might get the resources that they feel they need or whatever, the time from us, but it doesn't help in the long term. If we have to be joyful in what we're doing. That's why I say, yeah, pull back. If we're at a point where, okay, the joy's gone, ain't happening. Well, then find the joy, find a way of approaching it, find a way of being with it, set your limits, whatever, and then roll up your sleeves and get back in. That's what we need to do. That's the generosity of spirit that we're talking about here. We people who care, and you're all caring beings, must be attractive, must be filled with joy so that others recognize that caring, that helping, and being generous are not a burden. Doing these things is a joy. Give the world your love, your service, your healing, but you can also give it your joy. This too is a great gift. So we can give our material possessions, we can give protection, we can give teachings and things that will help others spiritually, and we can give our joy, being joyful beings in the world. Now, again, I think this is so skillful, the way their dialogue went and the way the book was crafted to get to this point. As Douglas Abrams pointed out, the Archbishop and the Dalai Lama were describing a special kind of generosity, the generosity of the spirit. The quality they both have, perhaps more than any other, is this generosity of the spirit. They're big-hearted, magnanimous, tolerant, broad-minded, patient, forgiving, and kind. I mean, who doesn't want to be all those things? We all want to be all those things. We all want to be a source of that for others in our world. Yeah. Right? That's a really important way of expressing our generosity. I mean, I even just go to the place of like when we're walking down the street and we just have a mind of, again, this non-harmfulness towards others, compassion towards others. I don't know if you practiced when my advice during the break of like when you see other people on the grounds or whatever of having compassionate thoughts to them. If you're expressing those thoughts, I think people pick up on you that you're not a threat to them. You're not a harm to them. You're something even quite, attractive to them. We're coming from a place of our own joy and expressing that joy in the world. Again, it's an incredible gift that the world needs. God, it needs it so bad, right? Because it seems more and more bereft of joy. That's why, again, I think everybody was excited when Kamala Harris comes on, bringing the joy back into politics. Well, are they real sources of joy is the question. Can we find those deeper sources of joy that we can continue to live from that place of joy, regardless of what's happening, who gets elected, whatever goes on in our world, that we're going to still be that light of joy? It's really, really powerful teachings. Every time I teach this subject, I get more and more out of it. So I'm really appreciative of you all coming to give me the opportunity to do this. So maybe this generosity of the spirit is the truest expression of spiritual development, of what the Archbishop had said it takes time to become. The Archbishop had used a beautiful phrase to describe this way of being in the world: becoming an oasis of peace, a pool of serenity that ripples out to all of those around us. It's almost a haiku itself, isn't it? Becoming an oasis of peace, a pool of serenity that ripples out to all of those around us. Again, I think that is how I see His Holiness, Archbishop, great spiritual leaders, even Pope Francis, many people in the world who aren't in those leadership positions, becoming an oasis of peace, something that can be, you're an emissary of that. You are advocating that in the world and you express it in how you are in the world. Again, a very powerful way of being generous. So within spiritual giving in the book, they did mention this. They said it can also involve helping others to be more joyful through the generosity of your own spirit. Seek to be that oasis of caring and concern as you live your life. Simply smiling at others as you walk down the street can make an enormous difference in the quality of human interaction in your community. Take it off screen here to add a little comment. I go out for a morning walk at home through our neighborhood, and I've developed the habit of waving to everyone in their cars as they go by, when they're coming in the direction of me. If they're going behind me, well, then it's kind of hard to. But, and I have to admit that when the school kids start coming in, because we have a school in our neighborhood and the cars come in with the kids, I don't, because they're not really a part of our neighborhood per se, but sometimes I will. But I just feel like it's kind of overkill. Plus, there's like 4 or 5 cars in a row and you go, seems a little weird. But what's interesting is as I've been doing this, people have gotten to know my face on the street. Like, oh, there's that guy that walks and they wave, Initially it was like nobody was like, they're all like driving like this. And maybe 1 or 2 people might They might put the on the wheel and they do that. They just kind of raise their hand on the steering wheel. But it's kind of a nice practice, right? And I smile and I just wave. I'm just doing my walk, doing my mantras while I walk or whatever. Again, very simple things, but I feel more connected then to the people in the community, and I've gotten to recognize some of them in their cars, and I go, "Oh, there's that guy in the red pickup. Oh, hi." So again, little things. I think we need those little things. Because again, there's so much that we're getting in the big world that's really antithetical to that, really about divisiveness and whatever. One of those people I'm waving to may be the guy with the sign that's, you know, right, exactly. And I'm like, yeah, the Trump sign, and I'm like going, oh, maybe I'm already waving to him. That's great, but how wonderful. I shouldn't be discriminatory in my waves and my smiles, right? Smile at everyone. Everybody needs a smile. Everybody needs a hello, a wave. Okay. And it is this interaction that is most responsible for the quality of human life on our increasingly crowded and lonely planet, our affluent and yet still impoverished world. Yeah. And this is, I think, what we can add. We can do lots of other acts of generosity. Don't get me wrong. That's how we went through all of those. But just being generous in our spirit and how we are in the world, what a wonderful gift. So I don't know, the question I came up with maybe takes us a little off topic, but how have you overcome your own obstacles to being generous? If we want to share a few comments on that. Again, we're getting close to the end here, but has there been anything that comes to mind in terms of a time where you did see that you were able to get past something? And what helped you to get past that? Was there, was there a shift in your perspective, perhaps a shift in something else, or, you know, how have you overcome that? Again, don't necessarily need to answer that, but I'm curious. Anyone? Yes, please, John. We'll get the microphone for you if you don't mind, so folks at home can hear you.
No, my thought is simply that Beverly and I have had uh, a long marriage, a happy marriage, I think. Sure. And we're at a point in our life where I think we don't have to stress over the day-to-day costs of living, and other things that might influence decisions that otherwise wouldn't. And so I think we're very, very fortunate, very blessed in that sense that we're able to attend something like this, where our friends or acquaintances might be doing something less amazing for them.
I understand. Thank you for sharing that, John. No, thank you for the generosity of your spirit by sharing that, because it does speak to you're here doing something that's meaningful for you. And it's good that you have the resources and the ability to do that. Gratefulness as well. Got all those pillars going on there, John. That's great. Yes. Mary, please.
Sort of piggybacking off of what you said, I feel very fortunate to have what we have in life. And there's a saying, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, to give with a warm hand instead of a cold hand.
I haven't heard that.
So what we're trying to do is, instead of dying and our children inheriting what they're going to inherit, if they need something now, to give them that down payment on that car, or that, whatever that nursery school they wanted to go to, but they couldn't afford. So in that regard, that feels very good to be in a situation where we are fortunate enough to be able to do that.
Wonderful.
So giving with a warm hand instead of a cold hand, it helps my heart. I like it.
Yeah. It's funny, when you first said it, I didn't expect it was going to be the cold hand of a dead body. Now that I get it. Yeah, exactly. Bring out the humor. Yeah. But But anyway, yeah, no, that's a really good one. You know, in Buddhism, we often say that one of the obstacles at our time of our death is that if we haven't dealt with all the stuff that we have and whatever, that it's really good to practice generosity of giving that all away, because otherwise it can be a real source of attachment and keep you clinging to what you had, whereas you really want to be able to let go at that point. So, say something similar, but again, it's really important that you find, and the thing is too, is you can share then in the joy of giving. When people receive something after you've gone, well, you're not there. You can't really have that reciprocal thing going on of them being able to express their gratitude at what you're giving, you being able to be generous. It's beautiful. Anyone else? Anything? We don't have to necessarily go to the question, but anything that comes to mind in terms of your own practice of generosity? Yes, please, Elena.
So, like I said before, I was born in Romania, and every other year I go to Romania, or every year sometimes. And I was born in a village, and there are so many kids in that village who are so wonderful kids. They appreciate learning, and I bring some. They want to learn English. I bring some books that, there are books for kids in English, and any things that comes from America. Oh, that's in them. That lady came from California. That's me. Everything that comes from America is so highly appreciated. And yes, I'm happy when I see their smile and happiness.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's beautiful. And that is something that often happens, right? That when we give, as was said by the Archbishop, we receive so much more. But I think, one of the tricky things is that sometimes we do give and there's no gratitude from the person that we're giving it to, right? That does happen. I mean, I've even had instances where I've given to someone on the street who's asking for money and they kind of go, is that all or something? They put some judgment on it or they whatever. Or if you want to offer them food instead of money and you say, well, I don't have money, but maybe I've got this food that and they're like, I don't want that food. And then, you have to kind of back up and say, well, wait a second, it's not about me. This is my own kind of giving to the other person. Whether they take it happily, whether they're joyful at receiving it, isn't as important as the fact that, I'm extending myself to another. I'm having compassion for another. So it's great when we do get the gratitude and people that really are nice to give to, and they have this amazing response because we brought them something that they really do want and that they can enjoy, and we can experience that joy with them. But it's also going to be sometimes where that's not going to be the case. So just be mindful not to let it dampen our own joy, just to still feel good that we did that. Well, I still did my best. I still was able to extend myself. Yeah. These are great, great responses. We're already to 12:30. I need to kind of wrap things up here, folks. So sorry if I'm moving forward without giving you a chance, and especially folks at home. I don't know. I've been trying to be attentive to you. I'm sorry if I wasn't. So when we practice a generosity of spirit, we are in many ways practicing all the other pillars of joy. This was a beautiful passage in the book. In generosity, there's a wider perspective, right? When we're being generous in our spirit, we see our connection to others. There's also in that generosity of spirit a humility that recognizes our place in the world and acknowledges that at another time we could be the one in need, whether that need is material, emotional, or spiritual, right? There's that wonderful phrase they use in theistic traditions, there but for the grace of God go I. I use the Buddhist one, there but for the grace of good karma go I, because essentially it's the same kind of principle. We could be that person on the street. We've been that person on the street. We've been people in need. We could see that and humble ourselves from that vantage point. There's a sense of humor in generosity of the spirit, an ability to laugh at ourselves so that we do not take ourselves too seriously. There's an acceptance of life in which we do not force life to be other than what it is. There's a forgiveness of others and a release of what might otherwise have been. And there's a gratitude for all that we have been given that creates the opportunity for us to be generous, for us to be kind to others. Finally, we see others with a deep compassion and a desire to help those who are in need. And that's the place that we live from when we have generosity of spirit. From this comes a generosity that is wisely selfish, a generosity that recognizes helping others as actually helping ourselves. that whatever we do in response to the suffering of others and the needs of others is actually what we are doing for ourselves. How we treat others is how we treat ourselves. You know? As the Dalai Lama put it, in fact, taking care of others, helping others, ultimately is the way to discover your own joy and to have a happy life. That's the short version of this course. If you'd come for just like 5 minutes on Friday night, that's what I would have told you. Taking care of others, helping others, that's ultimately the way to discover your own joy and to have a happy life. Again, the practice suggestions around generosity. Let me actually go to the sheet once more because I did reword these on the sheet for this course. So again, every time I teach this, I try to fine-tune things, change things a little bit. So for generosity, reflect on and rejoice in all the various ways, no matter how seemingly slight, that you give to others. You know, we have birds that come to the front of our house and the back of our house, and every morning when I'm home, I go out to feed the birds. You know, and it gets to become kind of rote because it's something I do every morning. Give them water, give them food. But, you know, that's a seemingly small thing, but it's big for the birds, right? They're out there every morning and just waiting in the bushes like, you know, you're finally here, you know. So consider how you might strengthen your regular concern for others through the 3 types of generosity and enact what you can in your life. Again, spiritual giving includes that generosity of the spirit. Notice any experience of joy as well as any lessening of your own tightness around giving. Again, that's one of our obstacles, right? That we just, if I give, will I have enough for myself? It's kind of interesting. And Master Shantideva again has a verse on that that says, you know, that's the mind of demons, essentially. He says that's not a good state of mind. You know, we should be giving, you know, always with the understanding that that is the perfect thing to do, to give of what we have, and understanding the karma behind it. That's actually how we receive what we have. Every one of you, I can tell, practiced generosity in a prior life, or you wouldn't be here. Clothes on your back, a roof over your head, resources to get here, whatever. All of that is indicative of your own amazing practice of generosity. So again, experience joy as you do this, lessening our own miserliness, our own tightness around giving, so we can continue to be that in this life and future lives. I think I've got maybe, that was, I think, pretty much the last slide, but I've got my haiku in there. There it is. Okay, maybe it makes more sense when you read it. But, and then of course, I'm giving you my email address. This is the one I prefer for communications around Dharma stuff, and then I have another one that's a lot of business stuff. But if you want to get in touch with me, you're more than welcome. Again, this whole set of slides will be posted to the drive as well. So you can, if you're not writing it down, don't worry, it'll be there. The final thing that I wanted to do we have like 5 minutes to watch this? It's maybe only 3 minutes. We'll see if it all comes in. This is, whoops, I have to hook up before I share screen, I have to do the audio. Share sound, sorry. Then let me share the video. This is just the trailer for. We are going to be free! On my computer. Hearing over. Oh.
Sex. Did you say that? You are a monk, remember? I've sometimes said to him, the cameras are on us.
Honestly, the energy between them is 8-year-old boy.
You are mischievous. What is the purpose of your visit, sir? Just enjoy our friendship and talk about joys.
I don't think you could find 2 people on the planet who are more different than the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. One grew up in absolute poverty. The other grew up in a 1,000-room palace.
Unfortunately, that person is Christian. Unfortunately, he's a Buddhist. There's a lot of shared background. Both of them have deep history of struggle against authoritarian systems.
The Tibetan people are being exterminated. Their culture and religion are being stamped out.
Age 24, I lost my own country.
Amid tear gas and police dogs, Desmond Tutu led a people against apartheid.
When people decide to be free, absolutely nothing is going to stop them from becoming free. You can overcome the most horrendous circumstances and emerge on the other side not broken. When you say you are pursuing happiness, you are not going to find it.
Happiness isn't just something that feels good. Happier people, they're physically healthier, they have stronger immune systems, they even live longer.
Ultimate source of happy life, inside, not outside.
We really become something quite special.
Yes.
I think at the time of my death, I will remember you.
Thank you.
Okay. You can watch it online. Whoops. Turn this down. I don't think it's free online. I think you do have to stream from a service like Apple or Amazon Prime, I think has it. There even is a website that they have. I think you maybe they'll get more money if you actually go to their website and view it there. But unfortunately, they haven't put it out on any of these where if you subscribe. Whoops. I don't know how I did that. Let's go back. There's one slide left. That's it. Just one slide. Sorry. And then that will be the conclusion for that. Okay, next slide. I got a little quote here from Henri Nouwen. He's a Christian theologian. He says, "Joy does not simply happen to us. We have to choose joy and keep choosing it every day." And that's another little nice piece of advice. That's the other part of my 5 minutes. If I call it down to 5 minutes, is that choose these 8 pillars. This is how, again, joy is a byproduct of these. So I do hope that what I've shared here, and of course with these two amazing beings of His Holiness and the Archbishop shared in their book through Douglas Abrams' kind facilitation, that I've been able to give you something you can work with in your life and that you can share with others. Anyway, thank you all. And thanks especially to the folks here at Land of Medicine Buddha, Isabella, Patrick, Mike, who is the director, and everyone that makes it possible for me to be here and to do that. Thank you.
Before everyone leaves, we'll have a couple quick announcements, and then you can have a chance to thank Don yourself. Don's teaching a class here on Thursday night. It's Thursday, October 17th, 7 to 8:30, in person and on Zoom. And it's activating feminine energy in Buddhist practice, focusing on the beloved deity Tara, female manifestation of enlightenment. You can register for that. And we also want to thank you very much for supporting the programs and allowing us to bring Dawn, a traveling teacher here. Your registration allowed us to make that happen. We appreciate it. I wanted to let you know too that we are have a call out for volunteers. If you're in the area, the spiritual program could certainly use volunteers to help with classes like this. Normally there wouldn't be 2 of us because of people power. But if we have more people, then somebody can monitor the desk and another person can take care of whatever else is needed. Talk to me about that, or my email is patrick@medicinebuddha.org. We're also hiring a cook for nighttime shifts. If you know anybody in the area that can do that. And also service study. There's a service study program here where you can come for 3 months. We're actually going to change that to just 1 month to make it a little easier. I first came here as a service study person in 2018, stayed a couple of years on staff, and just came back last Tuesday again. And Isabella, did you start a service study? Okay. the job description for the cook and the service study application and to express interest as a volunteer are all online. And we also appreciate people that are able to contribute on a monthly basis. That's friends of LMB, and then you get special perks for coming to classes. And that is also a link on our website. And thank you so much. Thank you, Don. Isabella has a couple words.
Thank you, Patrick. Wow. I just wanted to say thank you all for making this happen. And thank you, Don, for your wisdom, your vulnerability, your immensely beautiful heart. And yeah, all of the knowledge and wisdom that you've bestowed upon us during this time. I feel so incredibly grateful for your presence here, for your teachings, and for all of you being here. What a blessing. What a truly, truly amazing time and such a blessing. Thank you for being here and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. I'm feeling very emotional.
It's contagious.
So thank you all. Thank you, Don. Just a little something.
Oh, you're too kind.
If anyone wants to come, maybe we can in a line share whatever offerings you'd like. And yeah, thank you.
And thank you all online as well. Really appreciate you all being here and everyone here. My only regret is that I don't have more time with all of you. The time went by so quickly. So anyway, thank you.
Don.
Oh, you're very welcome, John.
Thanks, Don. That was a great class.
All right. Sounds good. Oh, yes. All right, Barbara. Thank you.